Look at a red apple. Science can describe the light hitting your eye, the signals traveling through your visual system, and the brain networks that let you recognize that apple. But there's one thing that description doesn't obviously contain: that felt redness. I mean, not the wavelength, not the neurons firing away. The experience itself, that felt what it's like, is called qualia. Qualia are the raw textures of consciousness. What it's like to see red, feel pain, or taste chocolate. And qualia are where materialism and physicalism start to look incomplete. Whilst physicalism is the modern version, it says that everything that exists is physical. Most physicalist views also assume causal closure. If a physical event happens, like your arm moving, its causes are fully physical. So the promise is clear: consciousness, meaning, and the self will eventually be explained in physical terms. Now I want to separate two things. People constantly blend. Science is a method: observation, measurement, experiments, models, predictions, error correction. Whilst materialism and physicalism are not methods, they are specifically metaphysical interpretations of what science finds. It is a clear distinction. They are philosophical claims about what reality ultimately is. But the claim only physical stuff exists is not itself an experimental result. It's a worldview built on top of a scientific success. And this matters heavily because consciousness is exactly what the worldview leap starts to look underjustified. The hard problem of consciousness, coined by philosopher David Chalmers, asks why and how the physical brain processes create subjective, qualitative experience, essentially a qualia state. Why is there something it is like to see red, feel pain, or taste chocolate, instead of the brain merely processing information with no inner life? Chalmers contrasts this with the easy problems standard neuroscience can attack by finding mechanisms, how the brain discriminates stimuli, integrates information, controls attention, produces speech, and guides behavior. The fastest way to feel the problem in this manner would be the Mary's room experiment. Mary is a brilliant scientist who knows every physical fact about color vision. She knows all the wavelengths. She knows all the brain pathways, all the neuroscience. But she has lived her whole life in a black and white room, so she has never actually seen color. Then one day, she leaves the room and sees red for the very first time. The question is, does she learn something new? My point is simple. If she does, then there is a kind of fact about experience, what red is like, that was not captured by the complete physical description. That is the explanatory gap in a single story. Neuroscience is very good at finding neural correlates of consciousness, meaning brain changes that reliably line up with changes in reported experience. But a correlate is not automatically the bridge. It can map which brain states go with seeing red and still not have explained why any brain state should feel like red. A common, I'd say, materialistic intuition is if conscious experience becomes more intense, the brain should show more activity. But some classic psychedelic studies found something that pushes against the narrative. A simple dial story One well-known study used functional magnetic resonance imaging. Using a task-free functioning magnetic resonance imaging setup to capture the shift from normal waking consciousness into the psychedelic state, they measure cerebral blood flow and they measure BOLD, which is a blood oxygen signal used as a proxy linked to changes in neural activity. Now, the punchline: people report profound changes in consciousness. They see decreases in blood flow and decreases in BOLD, and decreases are strongest in hub regions, including the thalamus and the anterior and posterior cingulate cortex. Crucially, the size of the decreases predicts how intense the subjective effects are felt. That is a correlate. It lines up reliably with experience. They also find reduced coupling between MPFC and PCC, a connectivity change in a major hub system. A second-hand approach used MEG to track fast brain rhythms by measuring the magnetic fields produced by the neural activity. That MEG work found psilocybin reduced spontaneous cortisol oscillatory power across wide frequency of ranges. In simple terms, some of the brain's usual rhythmic activities dropped, including in areas often grouped under the default mode network, which is often linked to self-related thinking and baseline in a narrative. My point is not the brain shuts off. My point is narrower and sharper. If you treat consciousness as a straightforward amount of brain activity, those findings make that look too simple. So when someone says consciousness is just brain activity, it's not compelling on its own. Psychedelics can intensify experience while some brain activity measures drop. For physicalism, that adds another explanatory gap. It's not even clear which activity is supposed to be consciousness. It is also important to mention that blindsight usually shows up after damage to the primary visual cortex V1 at the back of the brain. V1 is a major gateway for normal visual awareness. When it's damaged, people can lose conscious vision in part of their visual field. But the eye is still sending information, and some of the information can reach other brain routes that bypass V1. So in blindsight, a person will sincerely report that they cannot see anything there. Yet if you force them to guess left or right, moving or still, they can perform above chance. So you get a striking split. The brain can still process visual input well enough to guide behavior, while the felt experience of seeing is missing. That matters for the hard problem. If I reduce consciousness to information processing, blindsight pushes back. Processing can happen without qualia. So what exactly turns processing into experience? For physicalism, that's the missing bridge. People assume unresponsive equals unconscious, but that shortcut can fail. Sarasso and his colleagues measured a perturbational complexity index using TMS with EEG during anesthesia with propofol, Exone and ketamine. They found low PCI under propofol and Exone, but a wakefulness-like complex pattern under ketamine. And the reports matched. After propofol and Exone, participants reported no experience, whereas after ketamine they reported long vivid dreams. So the key takeaway is, unresponsiveness doesn't guarantee unconsciousness, and consciousness isn't a simple more activity dial. It depends on the brain's organization and complexity. Consciousness is not only a raw feeling, it is also meaning. Your thoughts about things, a place, a person, tomorrow, a plan. That aboutness is called intentionality. Here's the problem. A purely physical description gives you neurons firing and signals moving, but it doesn't obviously give you what those signals are about. A neural pattern can correlate with Paris, but correlation isn't yet meaning. Yes, a physicalist can explain learning, prediction, and why behavior becomes more accurate over time. But meaning has a built-in norm. Beliefs can be true or false. Reasons can be good or bad. Arguments can be valid or invalid. You can be mistaken for a reason, Atoms aren't true or false, they just move. So physicalism owns an explanation of how genuine meaning and genuine correctness arise, not just behavior that looks meaningful from the outside. Some might say consciousness emerges from neurons like wetness emerges from H2O. And yes, emergence is real in many domains. But here's the difference. Wetness is a third-person property. It's a label for how water behaves. Consciousness is not just outward behavior. Consciousness includes first-person experience, qualia. So even if I explain every mechanism in the brain, even if I solve every easy problem, I can still ask the charmless question, why is there something it is like to be that system? That question doesn't arise for wetness in the same way. So for me, emergence only becomes a real explanation if it includes a bridge principle connecting physical structure to subjective experience. Without that bridge, emergence becomes a respectable way of saying at some point it appears. And that's not satisfying enough. But consciousness with the hard problem forces a special question. Why and how physical processes produce qualia? Not merely information processing, and it highlights the explanatory gap between objective mechanism and subjective experience. And when I look at the evidence, the simplest materialistic shortcuts keep breaking. Psychedelic studies show intense subjective experience alongside decreases in key fMRI activity proxies and reduce arithmetic power measures by MEG. Blindsight shows visual processing without conscious seeing after V1 damage. Anesthesia work shows unresponsiveness does not always mean unconsciousness. I'm saying science is strong, and the metaphysical conclusion often claims more than science itself strictly delivers. Thank you for staying, and have a delightful day.